Medical workers have read it. What were the most haunting last words you've heard from a patient? My 27, I turned 28 on January 25, mom's 53 in hospice, and a nurse came by today just to inform us that she's in the active stages of dying, so a few days or so. My mom hasn't been lucid much, other than the other day when my dad tried picking a fight with me. Aside from that last night, my mom was somewhat lucid again, and I assumed she noticed me crying, gave me a hug and kiss, and said I'll see you later. She's the youngest sibling in her family and her parents are still alive as well. She was diagnosed last year with stage 3 pancreatic cancer, stage 4 now. I'm not ready for this. My first day in the ICU, I was taking care of an older lady with sepsis. She was very confused and for the most part incoherent, but when I was assisting her at one point in the night she started muttering and wailing to herself. I leaned in closer to hear since I thought she was saying something to me, and she just kept repeating, "I'm dying. I'm going to die." Sure enough, later that night she ended up coding and passed away. I did post-mortem care that same day for her family to see her in peace. I am a medical worker, but the one that stays with me is actually when my aunt was dying. I think I was about 14, and she was my favorite aunt. I held her hand and asked her to wait until her birthday so that I could wish her happy birthday, a silly request looking back, and the last thing she said to me was, "Okay." She lasted until the morning of her birthday. I wished her happy birthday, and she passed away with a smile. I had forgotten that until I saw this question. Thank you for asking it. When I was a police officer in Phoenix, I was first to arrive at a motorcycle accident. I saw a young man lying in the street, his bike was nowhere to be seen. I went up to him to assess his injuries and he could barely breathe. His whole chest and throat were collapsed. I was crouched next to him and he said, "Tell my family I love them." He died shortly after. I found out later he was a college kid that I worked out with at the local gym but couldn't recognize him due to his injuries. My ancient but healthy patient, her words, asked me to hug her before surgery, cause she was going to die today. I provided support and education, hugged her and sent her off for a routine short and easy procedure, with anesthesia she's had before with no issues. She had a bad reaction and passed. So I'm going to die today with no indication would be my answer. That's not the only time I heard a patient say that and be right, but it was the only unexpected one. I did the Santa job at an elder care facility. This younger guy lived there. I asked how he was doing. He replied, "Santa, I won't see you next year." I thought he meant that he was moving somewhere else. He again told me, "Santa, I won't see you next year." Not knowing how to reply, I said, "Well, I'll still look for you." The next year I didn't see him, so I asked about him. I was told that he had passed away. An elderly woman with dementia was asking me, "Who are all these people in these photographs?" They were pictures of her family members. She was scared and confused, not knowing where she was or why she couldn't leave. Still had enough brain power to comprehend her situation but not enough to remember anything about her life. She passed away a few days later after slipping and falling onto her hip. I held the hand of my best friend who had metastasized breast cancer. When I kissed her cheek goodbye she had tears in her eyes and wouldn't let go of my hand. I said, "I'll see you tomorrow, don't be sad," and while still clenching my hand she said through her tears, "I love you, don't you ever forget it." She closed her eyes right then and there and passed away after her 9-year battle with cancer. Not a medical worker, but I heard my upstairs neighbor die from cardiac arrest. Paper thin walls and floors. He just kept saying, "I'm not going," over and over. He was on the phone with his daughter, and I could hear banging noises of some kind. Couple hours later, there was an ambulance, then a van, and he was taken down the stairs in a body bag. It's just spooky, you know? It was in the back of an ambulance on August 16, 1977. The patient was an 81-year-old man who had immigrated from the Soviet Union, experiencing chest pain and difficulty breathing. Struggling, he slightly lifted the oxygen mask from his face, looked into my eyes and said, "Hundreds, I starved hundreds. Ukrainians. 1934. I watched them die. I felt nothing. I didn't think this would be so scary from a patient during the peak of COVID. Working as charged with no resource, computer issues, understaffed, and every patient was in isolation room. I was unable to give his morphine in a timely manner and he had just been put on comfort care. That is why he said that, and I will never forget it. I feel so guilty." A patient was admitted to our unit and had an acute change in mental and respiratory status within minutes. She couldn't get comfortable and was thrashing around in bed, trying to take off her oxygen. She screamed, "I have to poop," so we got her on a bedpan. She kept screaming that she had to poop, Then she coded and we couldn't get her back. 84-year-old woman with advanced dementia. She was very combative at night, scratching, biting, pulling out her foreign oxygen. I was her nurse for a week or so before she died. One of last night's HR clouds parted and she had a moment of clarity. She looked up at me from her bed and said, "This is hell. I am in hell right now." 911 dispatcher here. I was once screening a call where a couple got stabbed. The male was surprisingly calm, but his partner in the background was very panicked. I could tell she thought she was going to die. She kept saying, "Look at me." I don't know what happened to her, but I won't forget that one. Peds ICU. HIV positive kid. Must be 3 years old. Got infection from mom. Bad shape. But was a delight to play with. He had a transformer toy. Routine rounds, we used to play with him. I broke a small part. Promised him to get a new one next day. He passed away at night. I am haunted by that promise. I don't work in a hospital, but when I was younger my family moved in with my grandmother to take care of her while she was dying from lung cancer. I used to sit with her in the den and read to her. One morning, she looked right at me and said, "Go get your father, I'm dying today." Then she did. My mom came home to me in hospice and one day said, "I'm done. I'm tired of fighting. I'm going to sleep." She never woke up after that. I'm happy for her because she fought so hard and I know she was tired. Think of her a million times a day and coming up on her death anniversary on the 2nd. Lost one of my best friends to cancer. Finally got to see her in person for the first time since pre-pandemic. When I left I said, "I love you, I'll see you soon," and she just said, "I love you too." Gone a week or two later, before I could see her again. I wish I'd stopped at "I love you." "No, I'll call her tomorrow." Spoken gasped by a very young first-wave COVID patient when asked if he'd like the doctors to call his wife to let her know he was being intubated. 3 years on, I still always wonder what I would say to my loved ones if I knew it could be the last time. In my grandma's last days we went to visit her. She had exactly one lucid day, and she asked, "Is everybody here to see me?" I said yes and she said, "Why? Am I dying?" I held back tears and told her, "We just love you very much." Even typing and now I'm crying. Not really last words but, cardiac arrest patient. We got Rask and they woke up after several rounds of CPR and 3 shocks. By the time we got to the hospital he became more lucid, opened his eyes and said, "You should have let me die. It's not my fault, right?" A patient a very long time ago, about 2-3 minutes before he died from complications of AIDS pneumonia. I told him it was absolutely not his fault. I still think about this at least once a week. I was visiting my grandpa and had to leave town and go back to medical school, and I told him I loved him and would see him later. He told me he loved me too, but no, I wouldn't. He was right, he died a week later of pneumonia. The patients that spent their dying breath cursing and threatening us and calling us liars before they passed from COVID. I don't remember any specific quotes because they all blur together. Not quite what the post title is asking, but even though it was over 10 years ago now, I still think about how I was once listening to someone's chest and heard their last ever heartbeat. Don't die that. I'm not going to make it. I was trying to check his manual beep because automated was detecting nothing. He passed away minutes later. I am going to die. When a patient says this, it is either bullshit or oh shit. You can usually tell by the context of the situation though.